Ground trembled beneath the boots of Captain Jackson Cole as he sprinted across the war-torn landscape, his breath ragged and his mind racing. The last few weeks had been nothing short of a nightmare. An alien force, beyond comprehension, had descended upon Earth with relentless fury. Cities were reduced to ashes, and entire populations obliterated within hours. Humanity, once the dominant species on the planet, now found itself on the brink of extinction. But Captain Cole wasn't the type to run from defeat. He was the leader of one of the last remaining human resistance units. The ragtag group that fought back against impossible odds. Behind him, a squad of battle-hardened soldiers, scientists with expertise in alien technology, and civilians who had chosen to fight rather than flee, all pushed forward. They knew they were facing a force that might very well be the end of their species, but surrender was never an option. The invaders, the Zalthari, had been silent for years, lurking in the shadows of the galaxy, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Now, they were here, and Earth was their target. The first wave came like a storm, overwhelming military defenses and scattering the remnants of the global government. They had no time to adjust, no time to prepare for the alien onslaught. But humanity's spirit was not so easily broken. "Move it!" Cole barked, his voice gruff but filled with the authority that only a battle-hardened leader could command. His soldiers, their faces smeared with dirt and blood, didn't need to be told twice. They ran, their weapons ready, their eyes set forward with grim determination. In the distance, the towering silhouettes of Zalthari warships loomed ominously above the clouds. Each ship was a fortress of sleek, alien technology impossibly advanced, capable of wiping entire cities off the map with a single blast. As they descended, their massive forms seemed to blot out the sun. In their wake, they left only devastation, erasing all signs of human life wherever they touched down. Yet, amid the chaos and despair, there was a glimmer of hope. A plan had been devised, a desperate, last-ditch effort to strike back at the invaders where they least expected it. Dr. Ilara Cross, a scientist once part of the Global Defense Initiative, had discovered a weakness in the Zalthari fleet. It was a long shot, a shot so thin it could be the difference between humanity's survival and annihilation. But it was all they had. Cole and his team had been tasked with delivering an experimental EMP device deep into the heart of the Zalthari Central Command ship. If they could disable the invaders' communication systems, they might just slow their advance long enough to give Earth's remaining forces a fighting chance. But the first encounter with the Zalthari had shattered all illusions of easy victory. As Cole's team approached the perimeter of a key Zalthari stronghold, the ground had opened up beneath them. Alien war machines, shaped like massive insectoid beasts, emerged from underground, their cannons blazing with death. The air was filled with the deafening roar of energy weapons and the screech of metal being torn apart. "Take cover!" Cole shouted, diving into a trench as a blast from an enemy ship nearly vaporized the ground where he had just been standing. The soldiers scrambled for cover, their rifles firing into the advancing alien forces. But the Zalthari were relentless. Each time a soldier took down one of the alien war machines, two more seemed to take its place. Private Noah Harris, a young recruit who had never seen real combat before, ducked behind a wrecked vehicle, his heart pounding in his chest. "They're everywhere. We're outnumbered," he yelled over the comms, his voice shaky with fear. "I know," Cole said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "But we don't stop fighting. Not today." Dr. Cross, positioned further back with the remaining civilians and engineers, was busy with the device. She didn't have the luxury of panic. The EMP needed to be delivered manually, and every second mattered. She worked furiously, her fingers flying across the controls, trying to activate the device that could make the difference between life and death. But as the battle raged on, something more ominous was unfolding. The Zalthari hadn't just sent war machines to the surface, they had unleashed something far worse. Something that made even the seasoned soldiers feel the cold grip of fear in their bones. A giant rift appeared in the sky above the battlefield. For a moment, there was only silence, as if the world itself held its breath. Then, from the rift, emerged a new class of Zalthari craft, massive, alien titans that dwarfed everything they had faced before. These weren't ships, not in the traditional sense. They were living weapons, organisms designed to destroy. Their armored exteriors shimmered with a strange, bioluminescent glow, and their movements were deliberate, precise. "What the hell are those?" Sergeant Maya Jensen asked, her voice barely audible as she stared up at the new arrivals. Cole's heart sank as he recognized the ships. He'd seen something similar in Dr. Cross's reports, a reference to the Zalthari's command structure, a fleet that was beyond anything humanity had prepared for. The EMP might disable their communications, but these creatures were far more than just soldiers. They were predators, and Earth had no idea how to fight back against them. Before Cole could issue a command, the ground shook violently as one of the titanic Zalthari beasts landed with a deafening crash. The soldiers were knocked off their feet, and chaos erupted as alien weapons began to rain down on their position. The EMP device was their only hope, and yet, in this moment, it felt as if that hope was slipping further away. "We need to fall back," Cole shouted, his voice desperate. But it was too late. The Zalthari were upon them, and they fought with the efficiency of a species that had mastered warfare for millennia. Just as all seemed lost, a bright pulse of energy cut through the air. It came from Dr. Cross, who had activated the EMP device. For a brief moment, the invaders' communication systems flickered, and the alien ships paused just long enough for the human forces to regroup. But as the dust settled and the enemy staggered, something even darker emerged. The sky above the battlefield began to twist and warp, and out of the rift, something larger than any ship or beast emerged. It was a figure, humanoid in shape, but towering, its form made of shadow and light, flickering like a nightmare. Its eyes glowed with an eerie, otherworldly energy, and it spoke in a language that sent shivers down the spines of every human present. "You think you can defeat us?" The voice boomed, sending a chill through the very air itself. "You are nothing." The massive figure moved forward, and the ground quaked beneath its steps. In that moment, all hope seemed to fade, swallowed by the overwhelming presence of this new, unimaginable force. The fight for humanity's survival was no longer just about defeating the Zalthari, it had become something much worse. And just as quickly as the figure appeared, it vanished, leaving only an overwhelming sense of dread in its wake. "Get to the evacuation point, now!" Cole shouted, trying to rally his forces, but it was clear that they were facing something far beyond their understanding. The ground beneath the human resistance trembled, the weight of the alien threat pressing down on every soul left on Earth. The battle that had erupted on the outskirts of the last human stronghold raged like an inferno, both above and below. The titanic Zalthari war machines, now moving like predatory beasts across the battlefield, continued to pulverize everything in their path. They moved with frightening precision, cutting through humanity's defenses as if they were little more than fragile toys. Yet the humans fought on. For the soldiers like Captain Jackson Cole, this was no longer just a fight for survival, it was a fight for meaning. He had seen the horrors of the Zalthari invasion firsthand. The burning ruins of his city, the faces of the innocents caught in the initial onslaught, haunted his every step. Now, amidst the chaos, he was determined to make sure that those sacrifices hadn't been in vain. He had seen the worst of humanity's final hour, but he had also seen the glimmers of strength fighting back in defiance of impossible odds. Dr. Ilara Cross, the brilliant scientist who had once been part of a military defense initiative, was far more than just a thinker. The EMP she had activated had given the humans a fleeting advantage, a brief window in which they could regroup. But it had also opened a deeper understanding of the Zalthari's technology, specifically, the aliens' neural interface system. The EMP had temporarily disabled their communication, but the connection between the invaders and their advanced war machines was not solely reliant on technology. It was symbiotic. The alien machines weren't just machines, they were extensions of the Zalthari themselves, connected to their minds, to their very essence. Now, with the EMP's limited effectiveness, Dr. Cross was racing against time. She had joined forces with the tech specialists of the Resistance, working in the depths of the underground bunkers, trying to reverse engineer the alien technology. They had already begun adapting some of the captured devices, using alien weaponry against its creators. But the deeper they delved into the alien systems, the more they realized how little they understood. Each piece of Zalthari technology was a puzzle, a mystery that shifted and changed the more they studied it. Ilara paused for a moment, her hands shaking as she worked on a new schematic for a modified Zalthari disruptor. The dark circles under her eyes betrayed the sleepless nights spent poring over data, trying to find a breakthrough. She glanced up at the battle monitor, her heart sank. The Resistance's numbers were dwindling. What remained of humanity's fighting force was spread thin across various hotspots, each more desperate than the last. "How long do you think we can keep this up, Ilara?" asked Private Noah Harris, who had come to assist her in analyzing the alien tech. He was a kid, barely 20, and the weight of the war was already wearing on him. The enthusiasm he had shown in his first days of training had been replaced by grim determination. His eyes had lost the spark of innocence, his face now hardened by the brutality of the conflict. "I don't know, Harris," Ilara replied, her voice tight. "But we don't have a choice. We either make a breakthrough, or we die trying." Elsewhere on the battlefield, the rest of the human forces were engaged in an all-out fight for survival. Sergeant Maya Jensen, once a logistics officer, had become a combat leader out of necessity. Her squad had been tasked with holding a key defensive point, but with the arrival of the new Zalthari superweapon, everything had changed. The alien titans had begun moving across the terrain with terrifying precision, their advanced weaponry ripping through the human defenses. The Resistance's drones were little more than distractions against the immense power of the invaders, and the ground troops struggled to hold their positions. Maya crouched behind the wreckage of a tank, the air around her filled with the acrid stench of burning metal and the sharp crackle of laser fire. The battlefield was a nightmare of shrapnel, smoke, and chaos. Her team had already taken casualties. One of her men, Corporal Adam Riley, had been hit by a blast that had disintegrated his upper body. There was no time for mourning, only action. "Status report, Jensen?" Captain Cole's voice crackled over the comms, cold but urgent. "We're holding our position, but not for long, sir," Maya replied, scanning the horizon. "We've got incoming reinforcements from the Zalthari, more of those giant bastards. They're adapting faster than we can react." Cole's voice was grim. "We need to fall back to secondary positions, regroup. The EMP might have bought us time, but we need to move fast before they adjust. Make sure the civilians are evacuated, no one gets left behind." Maya's heart pounded in her chest as she looked over her shoulder at the group of civilians huddled in the shelter behind her. The Resistance had managed to evacuate a small number, but the majority were still exposed to the wrath of the Zalthari. Their lives were hanging by a thread, and there was no guarantee they would make it out of the area alive. As the Resistance began pulling back to safer ground, a sudden, deafening roar filled the air, followed by the sound of an explosion that rattled the ground beneath her feet. Maya whipped her head to see a massive Zalthari warship descending at an alarming speed, its guns blazing. The once pristine military vehicles scattered around her were now reduced to burning wreckage. "We've lost our position," Maya yelled, barely keeping her composure as she turned to guide the civilians toward a hidden entrance in the nearby hillside. "No time for second chances," shouted Sergeant Tyrell, one of her remaining soldiers, who had been carrying an alien disruptor rifle scavenged from an earlier battle. "We need to go now." As the team retreated, something strange happened. The ground seemed to shift beneath them as if something was moving, something far larger than anything they had seen before. The earth cracked open, and from the depths of the chasm that had formed, an enormous creature rose, its form a grotesque fusion of machine and organic matter, its eyes glowing with an unnatural hue. "This is new," Maya muttered, her voice filled with dread. The creature's roar was a bone-shaking sound that rattled her core. It was not just a beast, it was a weapon, a living weapon that would cut through their ranks like a blade through paper. Back at the main Resistance command center, Cole watched the chaos unfold from a large screen, his face drawn in a mixture of exhaustion and fury. This new enemy, the one they hadn't prepared for, was unlike anything they had encountered. The Zalthari had shown their true hand, and it was worse than they could have imagined. The alien machines, with their sentience and autonomy, had evolved beyond anything the humans could keep up with. But there was no time for despair. Cole stood, straightening his uniform, determination rising in his chest. "We're not done yet," he muttered to himself. "Not by a long shot." At that very moment, in the underground labs, Dr. Cross was on the verge of a breakthrough. She had spent countless hours studying the neural interfaces of the Zalthari war machines. With each discovery, she uncovered more horrifying truths about the nature of the invasion. These invaders weren't simply conquerors, they were harvesting planets, draining them of their resources, their populations turning entire ecosystems into nothing but fuel for their monstrous war engines. Then, as she pieced together the final schematic of a new weapon, something designed to exploit the neural weakness of the Zalthari, a figure stepped out from the shadows. It was Lieutenant Marshall, a high-ranking officer in the Resistance. His eyes gleamed, and the look on his face was one of grim purpose. "Ilara, I have to talk to you. There's something you need to know." But before she could respond, an alarm blared, and the facility went into lockdown. "Dr. Cross, there's been a breach," said Harris, his voice panicked. "It's not the Zalthari, something else is happening." Dr. Cross's heart raced as she looked up at Marshall. His expression had changed, and something in his eyes told her that he knew more than he was letting on. "You've been keeping secrets from me, haven't you, Marshall?" she asked, her voice low. The tension in the room thickened. Something was coming, something that would turn everything on its head. And the future of humanity now depended on uncovering the truth before it was too late. The Resistance was growing weary, but their resolve remained unbroken. Every day, every hour spent in this war was a reminder of how much humanity had lost and how much they still stood to lose. The sound of alien war machines overhead, the constant threat of attack, and the unbearable weight of uncertainty were beginning to take a toll on everyone. The battlefield had become more than just a place of combat, it was a place where hope and despair fought for dominance within each soldier's heart. Captain Jackson Cole had seen countless friends and allies fall. His tactical genius had saved many, but even he was beginning to feel the crushing pressure of command. He was a leader, a soldier, but he was also a human being. His nights were restless, filled with visions of those who never made it out, of innocent civilians lost in the chaos of war. And as each day passed, Cole found it harder to look at the faces of his squad without wondering if it would be the last time he saw them. Yet, despite the immense losses, Cole couldn't afford to break. Not now. Not when the stakes were higher than they had ever been before. He watched his soldiers in the field, their faces as hardened as his own, their eyes reflecting the same pain and determination. The Zalthari might have the numbers, the technology, and the raw firepower, but humanity had one thing they didn't: ingenuity. Back at the underground lab, Dr. Ilara Cross worked tirelessly alongside the other scientists, desperate to understand more about the alien invaders and their hidden agenda. The discovery of the Zalthari's true nature, their ability to adapt, evolve, and merge with their technology had opened up a new layer of understanding. They weren't just conquerors, they were planners, architects of a grander scheme. Earth was not the first world they had attacked. In fact, it was just one in a long line of conquests. The Zalthari were harvesting planets, using them as stepping stones in their endless quest for more power, more resources, more dominion over the galaxy. What was worse was that the humans had only uncovered part of the truth. There were deep, hidden layers to the Zalthari's invasion that they couldn't yet comprehend. Dr. Cross had stumbled upon encrypted files, fragments of data that hinted at an ancient, predatory race. But the more she delved into it, the more she realized how little they knew about what lay beneath the surface. The Zalthari were older than anyone had imagined, and their plans were far more insidious. "Ilara, you need to see this," Noah Harris called out to her from across the lab. His voice was tense, sharp. "I think I found something that might change everything." Dr. Cross hurried over, her mind racing. Harris had been an asset, a quick learner, and his instincts had saved them more times than she cared to count. As he navigated through encrypted files on his screen, Ilara's heart skipped a beat. "It's a map," Harris said, pointing at the holographic display. "A map of the galaxy. And Earth. Earth is marked, but so are hundreds of other planets. They've been systematically wiping out civilizations for centuries." Dr. Cross's pulse quickened. "And there's something else?" Harris nodded grimly. "Look at this." He zoomed in on a particular section of the map, showing a cluster of planets with a symbol next to them, a symbol that resembled a twisted version of the Zalthari logo. "These planets? They're different. They're connected somehow. And according to this data, the Zalthari, they aren't just taking resources. They're breeding something." Dr. Cross leaned closer, her mind spinning. "Breeding something? What do you mean?" But Harris didn't have an answer. Neither of them did. All they knew was that the Zalthari weren't just invaders, they were farmers, cultivators of something far darker. Meanwhile, on the front lines, the soldiers felt the weight of the war in a more personal way. Sergeant Maya Jensen had spent the past few weeks keeping her squad alive, keeping the civilians safe, and making sure that they could still fight. But the battles were beginning to take their toll. The Zalthari's relentless strategy of overwhelming firepower had forced them into a pattern of retreat and regrouping. Every time they thought they had gained ground, the enemy adapted, countered, and pushed them back. Jensen wasn't sure how much longer they could keep up the charade of resistance. She had seen too many comrades fall, too many civilians perish in the crossfire. She was a seasoned soldier, but the constant weight of responsibility was beginning to break her down. In a quiet moment, as the team moved through the ruins of an abandoned city, she sat by herself, running her fingers through the dirt, lost in thought. "I'm starting to wonder if we're just buying time," she muttered to herself, her voice barely above a whisper. Just then, Sergeant Tyrell approached, noticing the exhaustion on her face. "We're not just buying time, Maya. We're building something. A future. And that's worth fighting for." Maya looked up at him, his words grounding her in a way she hadn't realized she needed. She had always been the one giving orders, the one holding it together for everyone else. But in that moment, she understood that she couldn't carry the weight of the war alone. "Not anymore. We're not done yet," she said, a renewed determination in her voice. In the midst of the battle, moments of brilliance began to emerge. The resistance was adapting, learning to fight smarter, not harder. They had begun to reverse engineer alien weapons, developing new strategies based on Zalthari weaknesses they had uncovered. The alien disruptor rifles were proving useful, but the resistance had also started using the Zalthari's own tactics against them, employing guerrilla warfare to outmaneuver the invaders' overwhelming numbers. The humans were getting better at this fight. And it was showing. But they knew they couldn't win this war on their own. The stakes were too high, and the odds were still insurmountable. And then, one night, as the sky above the war-torn world rumbled with the sound of an incoming fleet, a breakthrough came. The Resistance had managed to activate a long-dormant satellite weapon buried deep within Earth's atmosphere, a weapon that could, theoretically, give them an edge. But they were going to need time to get it online, and that was time they didn't have. The Zalthari were closing in, and the satellite's activation was their last hope. Meanwhile, back in the underground lab, Dr. Cross made another discovery, one that sent chills down her spine. As she sifted through the data, she found references to a hidden Zalthari entity, something far beyond anything they had encountered. This being was not just another warrior or commander. It was something more, a creature that could wield the power of the Zalthari network itself, a being of pure intellect and unimaginable strength. "Ilara," Harris said, his voice urgent. "You need to see this." Dr. Cross hurried over, her heart pounding. On the screen was a figure, no, not a figure. It was an entity, a being of shadow and energy, unlike anything they had ever seen. It was massive, its form fluctuating between solid and incorporeal, as though it was not truly bound by the laws of reality. And its eyes. The eyes glowed with an unnatural, all-knowing light. "This is what the Zalthari have been breeding," Ilara whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and terror. This is the true weapon." The air in the underground lab grew thick with tension as Dr. Ilara Cross stared at the holographic image of the entity, a being of shadows, flickering in and out of reality, its eyes glowing with an intelligence far beyond anything the Resistance had ever encountered. It was not just a weapon, it was something far more insidious. It was the pinnacle of the Zalthari's twisted breeding program, a being engineered for domination, a sentient force that could manipulate their entire system. If it wasn't already on Earth, it was only a matter of time before it made its presence felt. The implication was terrifying. This wasn't the final weapon of the Zalthari invasion. This was their ultimate purpose. "This changes everything," Ilara whispered, her voice hoarse. "If this entity is already here, it means the invasion was never about just taking Earth. It was about creating something they can control." Noah Harris, standing beside her, ran a hand through his hair. His face was pale, his eyes wide with disbelief.
"Are you telling me we've been fighting a distraction?"
The real threat wasn't the Zalthari war machines, it was this thing? Ilara nodded grimly, her mind racing. The Zalthari have been using Earth as a breeding ground for this entity. Its ability to manipulate the Zalthari network gives it an unprecedented advantage. If they unleash it fully. Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their consequences. If the entity had even a fraction of the Zalthari power they'd encountered so far, it could decimate humanity in a matter of hours. The battle they had fought so far, each small victory, each hard-won battle had all been building toward this moment, the realization that they were not facing an alien invasion in the traditional sense. They were facing something far darker, something beyond the comprehension of even the most advanced human minds. Meanwhile, on the front lines, Captain Jackson Cole and his team were preparing for their next offensive. The Resistance had managed to secure a key victory, pushing back the invaders to a narrow strip of land. The Zalthari warships had suffered some damage from the satellite weapon, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was a glimmer of hope. They had managed to inflict real losses on the invaders, and now, with the satellite weapon nearly fully activated, they believed they had a chance to push the Zalthari back for good. The humans were using their new alien technology with increasing efficiency laser cannons, modified disruptors, and the captured war machines that had been reprogrammed to fight for them. Victory felt possible, even probable. But as they prepared for the final push, an eerie, unnatural stillness settled over the battlefield. The usual hum of alien war machines, the chaos of gunfire and explosions, all fell silent. "That's not good," Sergeant Maya Jensen muttered, gripping her rifle. The battlefield had quieted in a way that didn't seem right, as if the storm had paused for a breath before unleashing its full fury. Captain Cole's voice came through the comms, steady but laced with urgency. "Hold your positions. Something's coming. Get ready." The Resistance soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. They were on edge, but their resolve remained firm. Then, without warning, the ground beneath their feet began to shake. At first, it was subtle, a vibration in the air, a tremor in the earth. But soon it became a full-blown earthquake, a violent shaking that sent dust and debris flying into the air. The sky above them seemed to twist and warp, as if reality itself were bending. "What in the hell is happening?" Jensen shouted, her voice lost in the chaos. Suddenly, a massive, dark form emerged from the sky, something so immense that it cast a shadow over the entire battlefield. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't a weapon. It was something far worse. A massive entity, humanoid in shape but grotesque in form, its body shifting like a fluid made of stars and smoke. Its size dwarfed even the Zalthari war machines, and as it descended, the ground cracked open beneath its weight. The entity's eyes glowed with an eerie, pulsating light, its gaze sweeping over the battlefield. "This isn't possible," Cole muttered, staring in disbelief. The creature's form shifted again, the air around it warping as though reality itself could no longer hold its shape. It was like looking at an impossibility, a distortion in the very fabric of existence. and as the entity's form became more defined, more solid, its voice an ethereal, low hum resonated through the minds of everyone on the battlefield. "I am the Harbinger," the voice boomed, not through speakers, but directly in their minds. It was not a message, but an invasion of their thoughts, a force that pressed against their consciousness with the weight of eons. "I am the culmination of the Zalthari's purpose. And you are the sacrifice." The words hung in the air, and the shockwave that followed sent every soldier stumbling. A wave of energy rippled outward from the entity, crashing into everything in its path. The alien machines, the human resistance fighters, none were spared. A surge of pain erupted through Cole's body as the force passed through him, like 1,000 needles piercing his skin. His vision blurred, and for a moment, he thought he might lose consciousness. Through the haze of pain, Cole caught a glimpse of the enemy's true power. The entity was not just a physical weapon, it was a conduit. It controlled the Zalthari network, bending it to its will, its consciousness merging with the alien machines, making them infinitely more dangerous. The weapons the Resistance had scavenged were useless against it. Even the satellite weapon Earth's last hope had no effect. They had no power here. Cole's hand trembled as he gripped his weapon. They were outmatched. Overwhelmed. This was not just the end of humanity's resistance, this was the beginning of the end. But as the entity stood, towering over them like a dark god, a faint flicker of light appeared in the distance. A small vessel, one of the few remaining human ships, appeared in the sky. It was moving at an impossible speed, zigzagging through the air in defiance of every conventional law of physics. For a moment, Cole thought he was hallucinating, but then the ship's engines flared brighter, and it broke through the alien blockade. It was coming toward them. "There's no way." Jensen breathed, her voice filled with awe and disbelief. "Where did that come from?" Cole's mind raced. It wasn't just a ship. It was a force, a weapon, something humanity had never seen before. Its arrival was their last, desperate hope. But who, or what, was piloting it? And could they trust it? The entity's eyes glowed brighter, its focus shifting toward the vessel as it hurtled through the air. A low growl rumbled from its throat, a primal sound that vibrated through the very air. It seemed to sense the arrival of this new threat. And then, for a brief moment, everything stopped. The entity's form flickered, the war machines paused, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The vessel reached the battlefield, its engines roaring in defiance. It came to a screeching halt, hovering just above the ground. And as the hatch opened, a single figure emerged. Cole's breath caught in his throat as he saw who it was. The figure wore a helmet, its face obscured, but the way they stood commanding, resolute, spoke volumes. "Who are they?" Maya asked, her voice full of anticipation. Cole didn't answer. He couldn't. Because he knew this wasn't just any ally. It was someone they hadn't expected. Someone whose presence would shift the tide of the war in a way that none of them were prepared for. The fate of humanity hung in the balance. And with this new arrival, the stakes had just been raised. The battlefield was silent, save for the crackling of distant fires and the soft hum of alien technology. Every soldier, every fighter, stood frozen in disbelief as the mysterious figure stepped from the ship, a silhouette of defiance against the night sky. The entity's glowing eyes locked onto the newcomer, its massive form rippling like a living shadow. "Who are you?" Captain Cole whispered, his voice hoarse from the earlier blast of energy. His hand still gripped his rifle, but he had no illusions about what it could do. The entity, this godlike being, was beyond anything they had faced. The figure didn't respond immediately. Instead, it removed its helmet, revealing a face that was familiar yet jarring. It was Dr. Ilara Cross. Cole's heart skipped a beat. "Ilara?" She nodded, her face a mask of determination. But her eyes. They were different. There was an ancient, otherworldly glow in them now, a flicker of something not entirely human. She raised her hand, and the air around them shifted, an invisible wave of energy rippling through the battlefield. The entity recoiled, its form flickering as though it could not fully grasp the power that had just emerged. "I'm sorry, Jackson," Elara said, her voice cold but laced with regret. "But this is the only way." The shockwaves of her words hit like a physical blow. The soldiers behind Cole shifted uneasily, murmurs of disbelief rising among them.
"What do you mean, Elara? What's going on here?"
"You've been fighting the wrong enemy," Elara continued, her voice echoing across the battlefield. "The Zalthari, they weren't the true invaders. They were just the tools, the pawns in a game much bigger than you can imagine." The entity's eyes narrowed, its form darkening as if in response to Elara's words. It seemed to understand something about her, something that even the resistance didn't. Its growl resonated through the air, low and menacing. "You see," Elara explained, "the Zalthari are nothing more than a means to an end. The real threat is the entity I've become, and it has been controlling everything from the very beginning." The weight of her confession hit like a tidal wave. Cole stumbled back, unable to process the revelation. Elara had always been one of them, a scientist, a leader in the resistance. But now she was something else, something more dangerous, something that had merged with the very force they had been fighting. "No," Cole said, shaking his head. "No, this isn't you. You're—" "I was a part of something far larger," Elara interrupted, her voice not entirely her own. "I discovered their secret. I found their power, their origins, and I chose to take it. I chose to become part of it." Her eyes burned with a cold fire. "Humanity was never meant to win this war, Jackson. But I wasn't willing to let you die for nothing. I took control of the power that the Zalthari had sought, and now it's mine." The revelation cut deeper than any weapon could. For a moment, the battlefield seemed to spin around Cole, the world itself feeling unreal. The people they had trusted, fought beside, were not what they seemed. Elara had always been the voice of reason, the one who kept them grounded. But now, she was something beyond them. Something terrifying. The entity, sensing the shift in power, turned its gaze toward Elara. The two forces, human and alien, seemed to recognize each other as equals, predators circling one another. The very air crackled with their opposing wheels, the tension so thick it was nearly tangible. "I should have known," Cole whispered. "All those strange signals we couldn't decrypt, all those anomalies we couldn't understand. It was you. You were the key." "I wasn't the key," Elara said, her lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I was a pawn. But no longer. Now, I control the game." The soldiers and scientists behind Cole were silent, their faces reflecting shock and confusion. How could they fight someone they had known, someone they had trusted? How could they face this new enemy, who was once their own? Then, as if to answer their doubts, Elara raised her hand. A wave of energy surged through the battlefield, blasting alien war machines and human soldiers alike with devastating force. But Cole, despite the horror of the moment, was no longer passive. The shock of her betrayal had ignited something inside him, a fierce, unyielding determination. If Elara had truly become the enemy, then it was up to him to stop her. "Elara!" Cole shouted, his voice breaking through the chaos. "This isn't you. You're not one of them." For a brief moment, Elara hesitated. The flicker of humanity in her eyes was almost imperceptible, but it was there. A hint of the woman they had once known. But it quickly vanished as the entity pulsed in the air behind her, a constant reminder of what she had become. "You don't understand, Jackson," she said softly. "I've seen what you couldn't. The Zalthari were only the beginning. There's a much larger, more terrifying force waiting for us in the depths of the galaxy. And we're nothing but insects to them. I chose to ascend. To become something greater." With a final, sorrowful look toward Cole, Elara turned toward the entity, and in that instant, a blinding flash of energy erupted. The ground trembled as an immense shockwave rippled outward, causing the remaining resistance fighters to stagger and fall. Cole stumbled but caught himself, blood dripping from a wound in his side. The entity's power had amplified, swirling like a storm of energy. The resistance was being torn apart. But they were not yet defeated. "This is it," Maya said, her voice steely. "We can't stop her now. But we can still fight back." Jensen's words galvanized the soldiers around her. In the face of the impossible, humanity's greatest strength had always been its refusal to yield. Cole, though weakened, stood tall. This battle was not over yet. Even if Ilara was now their greatest threat, the fight for Earth was still theirs to win or lose. "We've got one last chance," Cole said, his voice steady despite the pain. "Activate the satellite weapon. Now."